In this story, we delve into the tumultuous world of family relationships, where every decision leads to unexpected consequences. Following the main character, we witness how he grapples with betrayal, toxic bonds, and internal struggles, and how his choices result in unforeseen twists of fate. Immersed in the story of one individual, we discover that sometimes the most challenging trials can be a source of unexpected revelations and personal growth. I have always relied on feelings. If I feel that I need to do this, then I will do it. It can be said intuition, which has always helped me in my life. But how can you predict what a person might change for you in the future? This will remain an unsolved issue for me. It took me 9 years of marriage together to realize that the person I let into my life so closely would turn out to be a pathetic traitor. In a quiet corner of our favorite cafe, where the aroma of fresh coffee created a special atmosphere, I glanced at Lori and resolved to have the conversation that I had postponed for a whole year. You know, Lori, lately I've been thinking a lot about us, about our future, I began, trying to catch her gaze. Lori looked up at me, her eyes full of questions. Have you ever thought that maybe it's time to think about starting a family? It's a big decision, of course. We both have careers, plans to travel, but ultimately, we've been together for 9 years, we're financially stable, and we don't have that much time left until we're 30. Time flies, I continued, trying to choose my words carefully. She nodded. Yes, time waits for no one. Let's seriously consider this. Our story began shortly after I graduated from college. Lori worked at the cafe on my way to work, and from the first glance, I was enchanted. But it took me months to find the courage to ask her out on a date. A year after we met, I proposed to her, and we got married in Florida, surrounded by family and friends. Lori had always dreamed of opening her own cafe, and together we saved money for this dream, deciding to postpone the issue of children for better times. Over the course of 6 years, we managed to save enough to purchase and renovate an abandoned space. It took another 2 years for renovations and setup, but eventually, we opened our cafe. Our cafe experienced a boom, and we had to expand the team to meet the growing interest of visitors. During this time, I was actively involved in the work there, while my wife Lori took on most of the management responsibilities. We always had a contingency plan in case things didn't go as planned. Lori usually stayed late at the cafe, taking care of cleaning and finances, and sometimes I helped her so that we could return home together. Everything was going well, and when the cafe started bringing in a steady income, we began considering expanding our family. I broached the subject with Lori, but despite my efforts, I didn't see any initiative from her in that direction. I even underwent a medical examination to ensure my health, and everything was fine, suggesting to Lori to visit a doctor. I was met with her refusal, which caused me concern. One day during lunch at a restaurant, I decided to directly ask Lori about our family plans. She expressed concerns about who would manage the cafe if she became pregnant. I proposed finding a replacement during her absence and even expressed willingness to leave my job for the cafe. Lori agreed to give it another try, but time passed, and she never brought up the issue again, as if it didn't interest her at all. Eventually, when we touched on the subject again, Lori accused me of ignoring her wishes and dreams of running the cafe. I was disappointed, not so much by her disagreement, but by her abandonment of our previously agreed-upon decision. I'd always been willing to compromise, whereas Lori seemed unwilling to meet me halfway. It all began when I decided to set aside my personal desires to support her in pursuing her dream. I doubled down on my efforts, working extra hours and overtime to make a significant financial contribution. Often, I had to give up something personal to save for her goals. But when she expressed a willingness to compromise over dinner a week after my decision, it encouraged me. We immediately got to work, but after 4 months of failures, my disappointment reached its limit. Lori simply couldn't conceive. I became proactive, consulted a doctor for a checkup, including sperm analysis. Thankfully, my workplace offered several free visits per year. The doctor confirmed that everything was fine with me, which led me to consider potential fertility issues with Lori. Bringing up this issue was not easy. I didn't want her to feel guilty or see it as an attack. So one night, lying in bed, I cautiously broached the subject, taking the blame upon myself and suggesting once again to see a doctor. Despite her confidence that everything was fine and we just needed to wait, I decided to be patient, conducted research, and found articles stating that conception could take years. Everything seemed normal, and I tried to be patient until one morning while getting ready in the bathroom, I found an empty package of contraceptives in the trash bin. This discovery stunned me. I picked up the package, looked at my wedding ring on the bedside table, and suddenly felt reluctant to put it on. I couldn't understand why my wife was using contraceptives. Gathering my thoughts with difficulty, I went to the cafe where she worked, trying to act as usual. I mustered up the courage and decided to return home to talk to my wife, but after visiting home where I found things moved around and realized that someone had been here, my concern only intensified because Lori wasn't home either, and it seemed like someone had been engaging in sexual activities here. Getting into the car, I finally allowed myself to cry for the first time in years, feeling the full weight of the situation. The day at work was awful, and I was filled with doubts about what to do next. One evening, sitting at the computer, I came across information about the contraceptive she was using. It turned out that this contraceptive was only available by prescription. Why do you need these pills if we both dream of having a child? Are you facing some health issues? I thought, deciding not to delay. I resolved to go to her and discuss everything in person, choosing a cozy cafe for the meeting. Leaving work early, I headed to the appointed place, but to my disappointment, I couldn't find a place to park my car. Driving around the cafe in search of parking, I accidentally noticed her with a stranger around the corner of the establishment. Their brief kiss completely changed my perception of what was happening. I didn't go to the meeting. Instead, I turned around and drove in the opposite direction, with shock in my heart. I returned home, where puzzle pieces began to fall into place in my mind. Everything fit together: the pills, the desire to avoid pregnancy from someone else. I needed time to calm down and think everything through. After much contemplation, I realized that avoiding direct confrontation would not be possible, but accusing without evidence was not in my principles. So, I found Raymond Maldonado, a former detective who agreed to help me unravel the situation. "Are you sure you want to know the whole truth?" he asked. My determination was unwavering. I needed facts for my next steps. By evening, when I returned home, Lori asked why I missed our meeting. "Just not feeling well," I joked, trying to conceal my true feelings. Over the next few days, I kept my distance, spending more time at the office and avoiding unnecessary encounters. There was a struggle within me about the decision I had to make after receiving the results of the investigation. After a week of investigation, Raymond invited me to meet, greeting me. He immediately handed me a glass of whiskey. I downed it in one gulp and sat down. Raymond handed me a file, and I reviewed its contents. Scott HTA, Lori's former classmate, was the last person she slept with. They indulged in adultery together at a motel not far from the cafe. "I'm sorry, Mike, but she's cheating on you. Everything needed to prove her infidelity in court is in this folder," he said. I remained silent, simply feeling hollow. There was neither sadness nor anger. It took a few minutes before I stood up. I shook Raymond's hand and thanked him. Arriving home, I waited for Lori's return. When she came, I was already in the kitchen preparing for a difficult conversation. "Let's talk," I said, handing her a cup of coffee and inviting her to sit. "Let's not talk about pregnancy." "I'm really tired and not in the mood," she said without much interest. She reluctantly sat down. "We will never talk about pregnancy. You've already given up on it." "The doctor prescribed you a birth control pill," I said, taking an empty birth control card out of my bag and placing it on the table. I saw her surprise and awkwardness. "It was in the trash can in the bathroom." "As no one else came to the house that belonged to you," I began. "I also found out that you had a doctor's appointment to avoid pregnancy. Let me clarify for you. I was just worried about our future. I didn't want children." They would have gotten in our way, she said. Stop lying to me, I shouted. She covered her mouth with her hand and gasped, starting to cry. You're just angry because I don't want children with you. You're a terrible person, she sobbed. I love you, I said, pulling out the photo of Lori naked with Scott in the motel. Let me show you what a despicable person looks like. You've been spying on me. You're trying to confuse me, she shouted. I hurled the coffee mug from the table, not at her, but next to her. It was enough to make her understand the gravity of the situation. I met her gaze and carefully took the coffee mug from her hands. I won't let it happen again, I whispered to myself. She turned around, seeing the mug crashing into her photo on the wall, spilling its contents. I'm sorry, it was accidental, she began, tears shimmering in her eyes. It was a mistake, Scott Hume's old friend, I exploded. You think the guy who secretly met you for months is just an old friend? Her confession about the clandestine meetings boiled my blood. I forcefully slammed my fist on the table, demanding composure from myself. It took me 5 minutes before I could regain control. You can gather your things and leave. Don't come near me. We're getting divorced, I told her, feeling the rage boiling inside me. The next day, I met with the lawyer, told him about my intentions. I didn't want to leave the house until the divorce was finalized. On Friday, I presented her with the documents. She took the papers in astonishment. You thought I would tolerate your presence, she smirked, barely holding back tears. We'll manage without you, I replied firmly. It's clear now. We're selling the cafe and splitting the proceeds. That's my deal, she resisted. I don't want to sell it. It's mine. You have to reimburse every penny I invested, I insisted. Otherwise, we'll go to court. I left the house determined not to remain passive. I needed witnesses, so I headed to the cafe to talk to the waiter who surely knew about my wife's infidelity, but he chose not to disclose the information, though I was sure he knew and understood everything. The next week, Lori's lawyer proposed a deal. I could have everything else if she kept the cafe, but it wasn't just the cafe I wanted. I wanted to take everything from her, down to every last dollar, so she would be left with nothing and regret her actions for the rest of her life. I decided she didn't deserve me to agree to her terms, so I asked my lawyer to reject them. I was planning to meet her in court. On my way home from the office, I was preparing for the upcoming legal battle. But the next day, my mom called and asked if I could stop by. She lived nearby, so it wouldn't be much of a detour. My mom has been living alone since I got married, as my father passed away from a heart attack while I was in college. She was on a pension and managing the house, but it wasn't enough to cover all her bills and groceries every month. I helped when I could. I knew my mom was making sacrifices to ensure I had everything I needed, especially during tough times after college when I was trying to find my footing on my own. So, helping out my mom was a debt I owed. When I arrived at her house, she was already waiting on the porch. I sat down with her and asked what was wrong. Are you filing for divorce? She asked. Yes, Lori and I are getting divorced, I replied coldly. Lori called me and apologized. You need to forgive her and move on, my mom said. I looked at her. My mother has traditional views on family relationships. She nodded, emphasizing that our family fights for marriage and doesn't give up in the face of obstacles, no matter what. I listened to my mom but didn't mention the affair because I thought it would deeply hurt her. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. I knew many family members on my mom's side stuck in unhappy marriages because of their staunch resistance to divorce, regardless of how generous one partner's actions were towards the other. Some endured constant abuse, infidelity, and even secret families, but they maintained the facade of impeccable Christians, which seemed odd to me. It was all fake, and I didn't want to continue living in the illusion of a happy marriage. My mom suggested seeking help, recommending therapy, or trying to work things out. She mentioned that Lori seemed to regret her actions and didn't want a divorce. Once again, I rolled my eyes, convinced that Lori's only concern was to placate my mother. I'll think about it, I said, but deep down, I had no intention of letting Lori off the hook. I had already made it clear to her that I would accept the judge's decision but wouldn't agree to her terms, as I had done many times before. I cared about myself and my well-being, so I wasn't going to make concessions to someone who betrayed me. A week later, on my day off, I was awakened by a call from my mom. "I'm having computer problems," she said. I already anticipated that it would be the usual, my mom not very tech-savvy, getting tangled up in her online affairs. "Got it. I'll be there soon," I replied, knowing that another visit to her house awaited me to help with files and photos. Once I freed up some space on her hard drive, I quickly checked the computer's performance. Opening the browser, I saw emails from both my mom and Lori. "Mom, why do you have so many emails from Lori?" I asked, noticing the recent messages. My mom's response shocked me. It turns out Lori confessed her infidelity to her. I couldn't believe my eyes as I read about it in the emails. What infuriated me even more was my mom's certainty that I wouldn't leave Lori because of this. As I continued reading, I came across a letter where Lori sought advice from my mom regarding our divorce. My mom, confident that I would never leave, advised her to keep her affairs hidden and not bring other men into our home. It was too much. I felt my blood boiling in my veins. How could my own mother do this? Scrolling further, I found a letter where Lori asked my mom for help. My mom made her first mistake, assuming I would never divorce. She didn't even know that my father, who seemed so faithful, had actually left because of her foolish actions. I realized that my mother had cheated on my father and he knew about it and wanted to divorce her. I realized he would have gone for a one-sided divorce if he had known about her infidelity. Though family meant a lot to him, he wouldn't let a bad marriage hold him back, and I didn't want that either. Analyzing additional documents, I discovered that my father had filed for divorce but died of a heart attack before the court hearing. My mother was to blame for his death, as she received money from Lori every month. This explained my mother's motives in her emails. She loved money more than her own son. I downloaded the chain of emails and sent it to my lawyer, asking if we could use it. He mentioned it was last minute but would see what could be done. It was Lori's admission of her affair. There were only 2 weeks left until the divorce process, and I wanted to rid myself of the nightmare. As for Lori, I don't know what became of her. The judge ordered to close her shop so I could put it up for sale. Driving by last week, I noticed the darkened windows, indicating she had at least complied with the judge's order, but I couldn't pity her, not even on a human level. My family on my father's side helped me tremendously, even offering a room in their home until I sorted things out. But now I prefer to be alone. I asked them to help me find a house that wouldn't cost me too much if they were willing to help. The drama surrounding my divorce is over, but I still need to sort out 2 chapters. First, I sued Scott for alienation of affection. I shared details of his affair with his office, though I didn't expect anything from it. Lori wasn't a coworker. Secondly, to my surprise, I sent the alimony to his wife, who was already planning to divorce him but now will file on grounds of infidelity. And most importantly, I stopped sending money to my mother, which I usually do every month. When she noticed the lack of funds, she asked me about them. I explained that since Lori was paying her, I didn't need to. To her objections, I told her she sided with Lori, not her own son, and that I was done with her. I suggested she ask Lori for financial help. After all, they're old friends, aren't they? Not very pleasant, but I didn't care. She claims Lori said nothing because of the judge's wrong decision, says she received nothing from me. I wish her luck, and she responds by calling me ungrateful, saying her nephews would never act like that. I reply that she should ask them for help. After all, they're good guys. And then she starts begging, playing on maternal feelings. But I tell her it's not about that. I tell her she's a bad person. A good one wouldn't encourage my wife to cheat, let her enjoy the forbidden fruits of life, just don't get caught. Now she knows that I know about her betrayal. Jesus says to forgive, but I simply cut her off and told her not to call anymore. Then the messages from family members started coming. Apparently, Mom was spreading rumors that I had cut her off, saying that she was getting in my way. I sent threats by mail to everyone who called or messaged. Now half are on my side, half on Mom's. They don't invite me to holidays, weddings, barbecues, but I don't care. My family's side is toxic, but I want to be near them because my mom is there. But now that I'm not talking to her, I don't need to deal with the rest either. I've gone through therapy, and now I'm okay. The mood is lifted by the 2 German shepherds I adopted from the shelter. At first, there was skepticism, but they turned out to be amazing. The best feeling is coming home and seeing them greet me happily. I think I've found unconditional love and support. I don't plan on getting into relationships anytime soon. It's not interesting to me. I'm focused on work, and in the future, I plan to open my own cafe, and I'm confident it will all work out. My ex-wife's lover left her, clearly not expecting such a turn of events. But I don't care anymore. I've done my part. This story is emotionally charged and prompts reflection on the complexities of family relationships. Reading about the protagonist's experiences and decisions, I realized that even the most challenging situations can lead to significant changes in our lives. It underscores the importance of self-awareness and making decisions in line with our true values. Story 2. Do you like pets? It doesn't matter if they're cats, dogs, hamsters, or fish, I love them. There were no pets in my childhood, but as I got older, I realized the role they play in people's lives. They are a real antidote to stress and a cure for many diseases. But it seems to me that I have discovered a completely different role for them, which I want to tell you about in this amazing story. I am Andrew Houston. As a child, I could never have imagined that one day I would want to have a cat. There was never room for pets in our house, and taking care of them seemed like a pointless waste of time to me. However, everything changed when my then-girlfriend convinced me that we needed a cat. The motivation was simple. I was striving for closeness with her, and so I agreed. After we broke up, she moved away, and I was left alone with this restless striped cat who became my loathed destroyer and, at the same time, a favorite. When we went to sleep together, his purring at night softened my heart, and I could not remain indifferent to this little manipulator. Unfortunately, I had to put him down due to illness, but by that time, I had already realized that I couldn't live without the sound of a cat purring, and I got 2 kittens, a brother and a sister, both black with blue and green eyes respectively. Their size and temperament differed. The male was bigger but calmer, while his sister was energetic and playful. Naming them Bowie and Iman, I began to take care of them. In any case, when I spoke to them sternly or commanded, they rarely listened, preferring to stay in their own world, but always sought my company. Difficulties arose when I got married. My wife did not share my love for cats, and initially hid her feelings. But after the wedding, she began to insist that I get rid of them. I stood my ground, and it became the cause of our first serious argument. In the end, I had my way, but it laid the foundation for passive-aggressive behavior in our marriage. Since then, I began to realize that perhaps I bear some blame in our complex relationship. At the height of our argument, my wife Cindy shared with me a story from her childhood that left her with a deep fear of cats. She told me about an unusual case with an elderly reclusive woman who was found dead in her home. The woman died of a heart attack, and when she was found, her pet cats, left without food, turned into real monsters. I think you can imagine what happened. This grim story deeply affected Cindy in her childhood and instilled in her the fear that a similar fate could befall her if something happened to me and I could not take care of our cats. Understanding the depth of her fear, I regretfully failed to support her properly at that moment. My laughter and remarks about her fear being ridiculous only intensified her hurt and did not help her overcome her fear. I realized that it was not the best display of emotional support on my part. Later, we both apologized to each other. I promised Cindy that I would take care of the cats in such a way that she wouldn't have to worry, and she expressed hope that she would eventually come to terms with their presence in our home. Days, weeks, and months passed, and I still considered her fears to be unfounded. However, over time, it became clear that Cindy was truly very afraid of our cats. She tried to get rid of them by leaving the door open, hoping that one of our furry friends would run away and not return. These actions were an expression of her fear and desire to get rid of the problem without resorting to direct conflict with me. I understood that our relationship with the animals and each other required more mutual understanding and respect for each other's feelings. I always preferred to keep the cats indoors, fearing that they might face dangers outside, as it seemed to me that their small brains couldn't adequately assess risks. However, Cindy, perhaps unconsciously, proved otherwise. Our cats, Iman and Bowie, seemed to be under the protection of higher powers, returning home safe and sound after each of their adventures outside. Their games and entertainments outdoors only convinced me that my fears were unfounded. Everything changed even more when I became engrossed in watching Instagram videos where cat owners shared footage from cameras attached to their pets' collars. These amusing and engaging clips inspired me to try something similar with my cats. It became a kind of ritual. Every day when I returned from work, I would attach mini cameras to Iman and Bowie and let them outside. They happily explored the surroundings, climbing trees and playing hide and seek. After active games and chases, they would return home ready to curl up and rest after a day full of events. This experience not only dispelled my fears, but also allowed me to see the world through the eyes of my pets, making our bond even stronger. Our cats quickly got used to the new routine and became very disciplined. They did not leave the house even when Cindy left the doors wide open, hinting at a chance for escape. It was as if they understood that without my presence in the house and without the cameras attached to their collars, going outside was off limits. This order of things greatly disappointed Cindy, who hoped the cats would run away, but I preferred to ignore her little schemes. When the cats returned home, I would remove the cameras, upload the videos to my phone, edit them, and post them on social media. Although it might have seemed like a strange hobby to some, I already had 500,000 followers. Videos of the cats exploring the world, performing amusing tricks, and making unique sounds became a hit. My followers were thrilled, as evidenced by their comments and likes. The success of my videos did not go unnoticed by camera manufacturers who offered to upgrade my devices to the latest models for free in exchange for their regular use in videos. This offer was timely, especially considering the new possibilities for filming. One day, returning home earlier than usual due to a snowstorm that promised to be a real challenge for the city, I realized that my cats had never seen snow before. The snow continued to fall, and I decided it would be a great opportunity to capture their first encounter with it. I anticipated their reaction to this new element for them, wondering whether they would be cautious or, on the contrary, excitedly explore the snowy landscape. This day promised to be special for both me and my followers, who would undoubtedly appreciate the chance to see Iman and Bowie face snow for the first time. The last few winters had been unusually mild, almost without snow, so the prospect of filming my cats frolicking against a snowy backdrop sparked a real surge of enthusiasm in me. Coming home and finding my wife absent, despite her car being in place, added to my surprise. Considering that her office had closed early due to the bad weather, I wondered where she could have gone. Iman and Bowie, who usually greeted me at the door, were invisible this time until I found them engrossed in watching the snowfall through the window. After I gave the command, the cats immediately headed to the door, ready for a new adventure. After strapping on the cameras, I opened the door for them. Bowie first cautiously looked around, while Iman, impatient for delay, dashed into the snow, leaving behind traces of his little paws. After a brief observation, Bowie followed him, and their snowy epic began. Their play in the snow was the embodiment of joy and freedom. They raced across the yard, creating chaotic tracks, tumbling, and jumping like little snow monsters. Watching their fun, I couldn't help but laugh, noting every trick and amusing moment. About 15 minutes later, tired but satisfied, the cats climbed a tree, choosing it as a place to rest. It was the perfect moment to enjoy a cup of coffee and continue watching their well-deserved break. Meanwhile, my neighbor, who lived next to us, always caused me some dissatisfaction. Perhaps his dislike for my cats or other aspects of our relationship left much to be desired. His name was Jerry. He was our neighbor and a general contractor who had recently completed renovations on his house. His work looked impressive, which prompted us to consider similar improvements to our own home. Additionally, Jerry had an imposing physique and never missed a chance to flirt with Cindy, which always stirred my jealousy. Cindy, on the other hand, brushed off my accusations, claiming that I simply lacked confidence. Furthermore, Jerry was passionate about cycling races and never missed an opportunity to talk about his athletic achievements, even when the weather forced others to stay home. Returning to the present moment, I had just finished drinking coffee when Cindy walked into the house. Her behavior was strange. She immediately asked about the cats, which was uncharacteristic of her, especially with such tension in her voice. Her appearance indicated haste and disarray, as if she had suddenly found herself at home. Her nervous demeanor and avoidance of direct eye contact with me only heightened my suspicion. When I asked why she was interested in the cats, Cindy attempted to divert attention, claiming she was just worried about them because of the weather. However, her rapidly changing emotions and avoidance of eye contact only confirmed my suspicion that she was not being sincere. It became clear to me that she might have been hoping for the cats to be trapped outside in this snowy weather. As Cindy regained her frightened look, I felt that something was off. Her behavior and appearance, reminiscent of a person caught off guard, only reinforced my suspicions. She seemed cornered, trying to find a way out of a situation she unexpectedly found herself in. My thoughts revolved around her strange behavior and possible connection to our cats, who loved to explore the surroundings, including Jerry's house. My thoughts were interrupted by a question to Cindy about her whereabouts in Jerry's house. Her instant blush and confusion only heightened my suspicions. By asking her a direct question, I tried to understand how deep the rabbit hole we had all been dragged into really was. Cindy attempted to divert attention from her perplexity, but her indecision and vague answers only fueled the fire of my curiosity. Deciding to take matters into my own hands, I suggested bringing the cats back inside, anticipating that the footage from their cameras might reveal more than just their antics in the snow. Cindy's reaction, her widened eyes and silent attempt to say something, only confirmed my suspicions that today's videos might uncover much more than the usual amusing adventures of our pets. At that moment, I realized that it would not only be a matter of watching videos for amusing moments, but also the potential discovery of something that could change our family's understanding and trust. It felt like standing on the threshold of a discovery that could shake the foundations of our family's well-being. Stepping onto the porch, I consciously left myself away back inside, fearing that Cindy might take advantage of the moment and lock me out. My call of yum yum yum, accompanied by the rustle of the food box, instantly caught the cat's attention, and upon hearing the familiar sound, they hurried home. Removing the cameras from them and rewarding them with treats, I followed the usual ritual of feeding. Cindy, standing in the corridor, watched me, her gaze unwaveringly fixed on the cat cameras in my hands. Her concerned expression and troubled look when our eyes met spoke volumes. Offering her to find something to do, I headed to the basement to review the camera recordings. My determination to uncover the truth compelled me to postpone mundane tasks such as feeding the cats for later. In the basement, I began the process of syncing the cameras with the app on my phone. I had the task not only to review the footage, but also to decide which ones to share with the world via the internet and which ones to keep out of the public eye. I watched a 10-minute recording where one of the cats at that moment climbed onto the veranda of my neighbor's house and approached the window. Through it was clearly visible how my beloved wife was having sex with our neighbor. They were lying in bed, and it was evident that Cindy was enjoying herself, but suddenly, her gaze shifted to the window where she saw the cat and apparently realized that her infidelity had just been captured on camera. It was amusing to watch her abruptly jump out of bed and rush to the window unclothed. Then she dashed outside and started chasing the cats, but she didn't catch any as they hid from her in a tree. The last thing I saw was my wife returning home. I sat in complete shock, contemplating what to do next, but one thing I knew for sure, divorce was inevitable. After hearing footsteps hurrying up the stairs, I quickly rushed from the basement upstairs, holding the phone with the camera on. I managed to photograph Cindy, who, ignoring me, was gathering her belongings. Her face was calm, and there were no visible signs of recent events on her. She took her suitcase, threw on her coat, and casting a glance full of regret at me, left the house without saying a word. I followed her, continuing to record as she slowly drove away, leaving tracks on the snowy road behind her. I thought she was heading to her mother's house, but I was mistaken in my assumptions about how things would unfold. A few days later, when I returned home after meeting with the lawyer, I was greeted by the police. The sheriff's deputy handed me a restraining order prohibiting me from coming closer to my home than 100 feet. It turned out that Cindy, backed by Jerry's testimony, claimed to fear for her life because of my threats. I was shocked by such an accusation and false testimony, which now put me in a very difficult situation. I had to gather my belongings, which Cindy had thrown onto the porch, into a black trash bag. When I tried to retrieve my personal items, including my computer and cameras, Cindy claimed that I had already taken them, but I hadn't. As for Amon and Bowie, she stated that the cats belonged to her and that she was willing to fight for them in court. The deputy made it clear that it was now a civil matter to be resolved in court. I decided not to argue and left, taking only what I could. What worried me the most was that the cats were left with Cindy. I immediately called my lawyer to discuss how we could challenge the allegations and retrieve the cats. So, I had to file a complaint in court to lift the restraining order and retrieve my belongings. My lawyer explained that the divorce process would be complicated and lengthy, especially considering Cindy's desire to make the situation as difficult as possible. He also suggested trying to retrieve the cats through animal control, although there was little chance it would happen quickly. Being at my mom's, I faced the reality that my attempts to seek justice were hindered by weather conditions and closed government agencies. While I didn't have access to the video cameras, I saved the recordings on a flash drive. Reflecting on the possibility of publishing compromising video, I decided to heed my lawyer's advice and avoid escalating the conflict, which could only distract us from the main goal, resolving the divorce situation. All these events led me to temporarily lose hope of seeing my cats, fearing they might suffer without proper care. However, an unexpected call from Cindy to my mother shook me up, hearing the satisfaction in her voice and the cats meowing in the background. I realized they were still alive but in danger. Cindy gleefully informed me about her relationship with Jerry and hinted that the cats had been without food for a week. It was a shocking and painful revelation that made me realize how seriously she was taking her revenge. Her words about me supposedly caring more about the cats than her hit me hard, but at the same time confirmed my fears about her potential actions against them. The conversation with Cindy took an unexpected turn when she began mocking the cats, claiming they were desperately trying to make contact. Her plans regarding them sounded cruel and merciless. She even mentioned a box of rat poison. But suddenly, the conversation was interrupted by a series of cat screeches and sounds of struggle, leaving me puzzled about what was happening. After a brief moment of silence, I heard Cindy's voice filled with pain and shock from the sudden cat attack. She tried to control the situation but seemed to lose control over it. Panic was evident in her voice as she described how the cats, upon seeing food, lunged at her, causing her to retreat and fall down the basement stairs. Cindy was in despair. Her words sounded helpless as she realized she couldn't move and might have been seriously injured. She pleaded for me to get help, but I was too far away to react immediately. Her condition evoked mixed feelings in me. On one hand, she was someone I once shared life with, and on the other, someone who wished harm upon my beloved pets. The conversation with Cindy continued to take a more bizarre and alarming turn. Her desperation and panic only escalated with each passing minute, especially when she started talking about the cats, claiming they could smell blood. Her words about intending to feed them poison sounded like a genuine nightmare. But when it came to concrete actions, it seemed the cats were not playing around, and the situation spiraled out of Cindy's control. Her attempt to mock and threaten the animals turned against her, and now she lay in the basement unable to move. I understood that despite all our disagreements, leaving her in such a state without help was a difficult decision. But her pleas for help sounded different now, not as manipulation but as sincere desperation. I hung up, or to be more precise, the call got disconnected. I tried calling again, but my phone was out of network coverage. Thinking that her new boyfriend would come to her rescue and help her out, I let go of the situation and continued working and living in my mother's house. A week later, I received a call on my mobile phone from an animal control officer, finding out that he was a fan of my cats and was concerned about their welfare. There, I felt supported and understood by someone who genuinely cares about animal well-being. The officer was planning to visit my ex-wife's house the next day, so I decided not to contact her. The next morning, I was saddened to hear from the animal control service that Cindy seemed to have passed away. An employee suggested that I probably wouldn't want to organize an open funeral for my ex-wife, considering that the cats had done their job too well as they were hungry and agitated. This has made it difficult to ascertain the deceased's identity, as the only clues left were teeth. It turned out my wife had a fight with Jerry about a week ago, and he hadn't visited or inquired about her life since then. On that day, he gave a statement and left on his bicycle. After this grim incident, it became clear that I would likely have to say goodbye to Ian and Bowie, provided they're caught first, of course. When the door was broken into, they darted out of the house like rockets and disappeared into a tree at the neighbors. I contemplated whether I could intercept them while everyone was preoccupied with the investigation around my late wife, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue cohabitating with these black creatures. Deciding to postpone that question, I headed towards my former residence, aiming to remain unnoticed. I left my phone with my mother to avoid tracking. I planned to park further away in the shade of trees at the end of the street and then sneak into the house through the backyard. But things didn't go as planned. As I approached the area, I noticed the absence of cats, and there were many emergency services gathered around my house. It seemed this incident would become the most talked about event of the month, spoken of for years, marveling at this story. I realized it was futile to try to approach my house because of the crowd around it, so I abandoned the idea of catching the escaped cats and headed back, choosing a path through the woods to the canal. This long route led me back to my car, which I had left in a secluded spot after a recent heavy rain. Snow lay everywhere, and finally, I reached the point overlooking the canal. The aqueduct built to redirect water from the river across a wide stream has always been a risky spot for cyclists due to the narrow path along its edge. Now, with snow covering everything around and ice possibly hidden beneath it, the crossing has become even more perilous. As I emerged from the trees and caught sight of the canal, my cat suddenly came into view, perched on the edge of the aqueduct, peering down at the slowly flowing water. At that moment, as I watched them, Jerry appeared on his bicycle from the other side of the aqueduct. He seemed oblivious to the danger, joyfully riding along the snowy path. But his path would intersect with my cat's, barely visible behind the railings and fading light of the setting sun. At the last moment, the cats and Jerry noticed each other. The reaction was instantaneous. The cats darted onto the path in front of the bicycle, causing Jerry to reflexively turn the handlebars and lose control. He skidded on the ice, crashed into the railings, and catapulted over them, plunging into the water, followed by his bicycle, which struck him on the head upon impact. As I ran towards the aqueduct, I saw Jerry struggling to get out of the cold stream. The sun had almost disappeared behind the horizon, and it was getting very dark. The stream wasn't very deep, but the water in it was icy, and Jerry was soaked to the bone. Besides, he appeared injured, his leg was severely damaged, and he couldn't put weight on it. Moreover, the steep icy banks of the stream made his situation even more desperate, especially considering his injury. When he saw me, he started calling for help. I couldn't make out his words over the muffling snow, so I jokingly shouted back that he could try calling Cindy for help. As he recognized me, he attempted to scramble onto the stream bank but slipped back into the water. It occurred to me that it was time for me to leave. Turning towards my car, I noticed my cats sitting on the path, silently watching me, their black faces expressing something akin to recognition. But in an instant, we all felt that our paths diverged. They lingered a bit, stretched, mewed softly as a farewell, and dashed off towards the forest, soon disappearing from view. I thought they would return home when they grew tired of exploring and seek refuge in their hiding spot under Jerry's house. A few days later, when I returned home and cleared away the traces of the stranger's presence in the bedroom and basement, replacing the bed with a new one, I heard from a neighbor that a tourist had found the body of our former neighbor on the stream bank. His limbs were frostbitten, and he died from hypothermia. They say hypothermia takes lives quickly and painlessly, as if you're falling asleep peacefully. Reflecting on what had happened, I couldn't understand why people consider encountering a black cat a bad omen. Personally, I've always had luck with them. Although now I think my next pet will be a hedgehog or maybe a hamster. This story is full of unexpected twists and turns, showing how life can be unpredictable. It's important that you remained resolute and fair in challenging situations. Your bond with the cat seems like something special, and their reaction to what happened underscores their incredible strength and loyalty. The tragic ending highlights the fragility of life and the unpredictability of circumstances.